afternoon. Well, I'm very conscious I've got the graveyard shift in this panel, so I'm going to be slightly ambitious as well. I'm going to try and talk about 3 distinct areas, but perhaps I'll keep an eye at the front here and we might just get 2 covered off. But thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak. I'd like to talk a little bit about our work, the Interception of Communications Commissioner's Office, IOCO. We're responsible for overseeing the intelligence agencies and police and law enforcement access to communications data and interception to the content of communications. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about our oversight regime, and I want to talk about some of the limitations in our oversight as a result of what the panel has been talking about, where law enforcement and intelligence agencies acquire data and share data internationally, and how we, as a result, then have some limitations and gaps in our oversight. So we're essentially auditors, and we conduct a revolving programme of inspections of police and law enforcement and intelligence agencies to check that they're acquiring data lawfully or intercepting lawfully. We look at the necessity and proportionality of the requests, and I want to kind of bust a myth of some semi-dusty inspectors and a semi-dusty commissioner going in, being locked in a basement in the GCHQ and the donut, with piles and piles of paperwork which GCHQ have decided to show us, because that's not how the oversight works anymore. We've actually worked really, really hard with a lot of private companies, system providers, to enable us to interrogate and access the systems directly when we go into police forces and law enforcement agencies. And as a result, we're able to construct queries and filter data and identify key compliance issues very, very quickly. So instead of searching through hundreds of documents, we can actually, at the click of a button, download 40,000 applications, have a look at what the designated person's considerations in relation to necessity and proportionality. We can see straight away when some of them aren't discharging their statutory duties responsibly. We can see where perhaps someone of an insufficient rank has approved an authority to acquire data or intercept communications. So these query-based searches are really powerful, and last year with those tools we looked at around 100,000 applications just through the query-based searching. So we're really trying to bring the oversight up to date as well, and move forward and use the technology to our advantage when we're inspecting. We've also got really good cooperation with the CSPs in the UK, and they provide us with data in relation to the requests which law enforcement and intelligence agencies make of them. And that provides the CSPs with a reassurance, because we're able to go into a public authority and say, well, you asked for this data from this company or that company, we'd like to see that you had a lawful authority in place to actually request that data. And I suppose that's the first gap. We don't have that arrangement with US or service providers in other countries, so we're unable to provide that reassurance. As well as examining the necessity and proportionality justifications, we also actually look at the downstream processes. So we look at how the data or material has been analysed, whether it was used for its stated purpose or objective. We can actually look at the actual intrusion that resulted, not a hypothetical intrusion that was expressed at the time the authorisation was given. And if that authorisation is ongoing, we can look at, well, actually, was the intrusion far higher than was foreseeable at the time the approval was given? And if so, does that make this disproportionate? And should you withdraw that authority? So it's quite an important power to scrutinise the actual operational effect and the ongoing collection of data. So last year we made over 400 recommendations to improve compliance and to improve systems and procedures. So I get a little bit frustrated when it gets reported that we've given agencies a clean bill of health, because I think over 400 recommendations is far from a clean bill of health. And we also launch investigations from time to time. Earlier this year we launched an investigation into police forces acquiring communications data to identify journalist sources. Obviously huge implications for Article 10 of ECHR, the protection of freedom of speech. And our conclusions for that from that inquiry were that the police had not given due consideration to Article 10. They hadn't considered the public interest, the pressing social need, the damage that potentially those leaks to the media had caused. And we made a recommendation that those types of applications should in future have judicial approval. The Prime Minister accepted our recommendation immediately, and the law was changed in the UK a month later. So now when police forces are looking to determine a journalistic source, they must go to a judge for approval. So just to talk a little bit about our powers and whether our powers transcend international borders, which I think is an interesting debate. So my first scenario is, well, what happens when a UK intelligence agency shares its intercepted material or data with another country? And I think as oversight bodies in the past, we've tended to look at our role in isolation within our own country. And I think now, in this global digital age, we just can't do that. The collection, the sharing, the storage of data between agencies, it transcends national boundaries. So once the data has been shared, for example, if GCHQ shares their raw data with the NSA, who's actually responsible for checking that the NSA then uses that data appropriately in accordance with human rights and in accordance with that country's investigatory powers legislation? So is that our responsibility? I don't know how things would go if I popped over to America and knocked on the door of the NSA and said, hello, I'm from the UK Interception Commissioner's Office, can I just come in and have a look at how you've used this data that's been shared? I don't think they'd let me in. I don't think they would think that my oversight powers reach across international borders. So are the agencies in the US looking at how the NSA use the data that's been shared from foreign partners? So I think this is one of the really interesting areas that we're working on at the moment. The Dutch Review Committee, interestingly, have described this as an accountability deficit in oversight. And the New Zealand Inspector General and Privacy Commissioner have recently reached out to a lot of oversight bodies, including us, to see whether it would be worthwhile working more closely on such issues, and we're very positive about that. So I've got a second example here in relation to communication service providers. So what actually happens when a communication service provider based outside of the UK makes a mistake when they're disclosing communications data to the UK? So I'll give you an example. A US social media company might make a mistake with an IP resolution because they have a technical fault with their system in relation to time zones. We had one of these reported to us last year by law enforcement who had arrested an innocent individual for child sexual exploitation. So what happens in this scenario? The US company says, well, we didn't disclose that data under RIPA because RIPA doesn't have extraterritorial jurisdiction. We voluntarily disclosed that data to the UK, which means it falls outside of RIPA, so it falls out of the error reporting functions to our office. So how am I able to then assure myself and the public that this mistake won't happen again? How am I able to ascertain whether the US company has put in place sufficient measures to fix that technical fault to prevent recurrence? So these are some of the issues that we're grappling with as oversight bodies. I'm conscious of the time, I think I'm down to less than 3 minutes. So I just want to talk about the Investigatory Powers Bill, which is going to be getting a lot of debate in the coming weeks in the UK, and really what we'd like to see in the bill. So I think if you look at all of the reviews that have taken place in the UK, so we have the RUSI review, the David Anderson QC's review, and of course the Intelligence Security Committee's review. There were over 100 recommendations in those reviews. I think David had over 100 on his own. But most of them fall into these 3 key areas. So I'm really hopeful that the new legislation that's being drafted at the moment will have legislative clarity, first of all, will have adequate human rights protections and foreseeability, that all conduct will be necessary and proportionate, and that technology is mentioned in a way that will ensure the law doesn't become outdated, but will ensure that it's sufficiently clear about what it actually allows, and I think that's a difficult challenge. The second area is accountability. It's really important to make sure that citizens have the right to effective remedy, that the agencies are held to account, and that there are strong checks and balances and effective oversight. And we're working really hard to ensure that our oversight is robust. And finally, it's about transparency and increasing public confidence and trust and reassurance. And we've submitted a paper today, David Anderson's review, which we published in December, setting out some of the limitations of the current law in the areas which we'd like to see reviewed. I'm not going to talk about all of those, but please have a look at our submission to David Anderson QC's reviews. But really, I think we've all got a responsibility to ensure that the debates going forward are informed and accurate. And I feel this responsibility really personally because we are in a privileged position in terms of our knowledge and our access to information. And it's about making sure that we can be as transparent as we can and can put as much information out there as possible to better inform the public and to improve trust. So I'll leave you with this slide, which is just some of the things that we've been doing recently to try and improve transparency in relation to oversight. So thank you very much.